For decades, the public imagination has carried a simple image. One day, somewhere in the static between the stars, a signal will appear. Not noise, not interference. A transmission. Something that survives every challenge and remains standing when all ordinary explanations have fallen away. In 2020, a thin line appeared on a spectrogram during observations of Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to our Sun. The line was narrow. It drifted slowly in frequency, and unlike countless false alarms before it, it refused to disappear. At first, that meant very little. Radio telescopes live inside a storm of human technology. Satellites pass overhead. Aircraft cross the sky. Electronics leak energy into the environment. Most unusual detections survive only long enough to receive a label before collapsing into something mundane. This one received a name. BLC-1. Breakthrough Listen Candidate 1. Not a discovery. Not evidence of alien intelligence. Just a signal that had earned the right to be examined more closely. The distinction mattered, because the moment a signal is flagged, a different process begins. The goal is no longer to find something extraordinary. The goal is to eliminate it. On a display filled with background noise, the line remained visible. A thin trace drifting across frequency space. The first filters were designed to catch obvious interference. Signals present in the wrong places. Signals appearing when the telescope was not pointed at its target. Signals behaving like local contamination. BLC-1 survived. Then it survived again. Each survival created a problem. Not because anyone believed it came from another civilization. Because every failed attempt to remove it increased the responsibility to keep looking. Imagine a fire alarm that continues passing inspection. Investigators suspect there is no fire. Yet every test says the alarm deserves attention. Eventually, the question stops being whether the alarm is real. The question becomes how long you can justify ignoring it. The signal's direction seemed connected to observations of Proxima Centauri. Its narrow bandwidth resembled the kind of transmission researchers often discuss when imagining technological civilizations. Natural cosmic processes rarely produce radio emissions that look quite like this. The drifting behavior made it even more interesting. A distant source moving relative to Earth can appear to shift slightly in frequency through the Doppler effect. BLC-1 displayed exactly the kind of behavior investigators expected a serious candidate to display. The line kept surviving. And with each survival, the stakes quietly changed. The burden was no longer detection, it was judgment. Scientists faced an uncomfortable position. They could not elevate the candidate beyond what the evidence justified. The history of SETI is filled with signals that seemed exciting before ordinary explanations emerged. Credibility depends on restraint. Yet they also could not casually dismiss BLC-1. The signal had earned something increasingly rare. A reason to remain on the table. The drifting line became a liability. Not because it proved anything, because it kept refusing to prove nothing. For a time, that uncertainty was the story. a candidate behaving exactly as a candidate should. A system designed to eliminate false positives, repeatedly failing to eliminate one. Then the pattern changed. Elsewhere in the data, investigators began encountering signals that looked disturbingly familiar. Not identical. Related. Additional traces appeared with characteristics that echoed the original candidate. On their own, they might not have attracted much attention. Placed beside BLC-1, they created a new image. The audience's eye no longer followed a single drifting line. Now it saw a growing collection, and that introduced a contradiction. If BLC-1 represented something extraordinary, why were relatives appearing? The signal's greatest strength had always been its apparent uniqueness. The more lookalikes emerged, the more fragile that uniqueness became. A candidate can survive many tests. A family of candidates demands a different explanation. The pressure shifted again. Investigators were no longer asking why BLC-1 survived. They were asking why multiple signals shared the same suspicious habits. The evidence had not vanished. Nothing about the original detection changed. The line was still narrow. The drift was still present. The observations were still real. Yet the meaning of those observations was beginning to move. Like a photograph gaining context around its edges. The answer eventually emerged through a broader interference framework. Researchers found that terrestrial radio contamination could generate signals capable of mimicking exactly the kinds of traits investigators had been trained to notice. The signal had not slipped through because the filters were weak. It survived because the imitation was unusually convincing. The drifting behavior, the narrow structure, the apparent association with the target observations, the very qualities that had justified continued attention. Those same qualities now fit inside a terrestrial explanation. One by one, the foundations of the extraterrestrial interpretation stopped being unique. The candidate did not collapse because a single fatal flaw appeared. It collapsed because it joined a larger pattern. And patterns are often more powerful than anomalies. Looking back, the remarkable part of BLC-1 was never how close it came to becoming evidence of alien intelligence. That was never the standard. The remarkable part was how effectively it activated the machinery of verification. The signal forced investigators to behave exactly as they would want future investigators to behave. Carefully, publicly, reluctantly, without belief, without dismissal. For a brief period, a false signal occupied the same procedural territory as a genuine candidate. That is why the story remains important. Most false alarms fail early. Most never reach meaningful review. Most do not survive long enough to create institutional pressure. BLC-1 did. The drifting line that first emerged from the noise was eventually reclassified as part of a terrestrial interference system. The signal did not come from Proxima Centauri. No hidden transmitter waited around the nearest star. No first contact followed. Yet the line still accomplished something valuable. In the beginning, it appeared to represent a possible message from beyond Earth. By the end, it represented something else entirely. A stress test. Proof that the real challenge is not detecting a signal. It is deciding when a signal deserves trust. And on that spectrogram, the thin drifting line means something different now. Not evidence that humanity heard another intelligence. Evidence that Earth had learned how to imitate one, convincingly enough, to pass the alien test.